This is going to probably be the last video for a while on the Borg, as I've exhausted all of Alpha canon. Unless Discovery decides to change that, so I guess we'll see. One thing that you can't miss about the series is how angry fans are at what was done to the Borg. How the collective went from actual unstoppable juggernauts that were a real threat to the Federation to villains of the week. Luckily, I was able to talk with a few writers about this entire affair. In this video, I will be discussing two conversations I had. One with previous Voyager writer Lisa Klink, and another an anonymous person associated with the actual Discovery show. I hate to Midnight's Edge this, but I gave my word that they would be anonymous if they were able to conclusively prove that they were affiliated with the show in a major way. Since they were able to do this, I will include their thoughts to a limited capacity. Though to be fair, their opinions largely mirror that of Lisa, so you can choose to take my word for it or only listen to the parts that I include with Lisa. The questions I asked Lisa will be included in the description below. As has been stated, Star Trek Voyager was one of the least liked series in the entire franchise. This was probably due to a lot of reasons. Looking at the Nielsen ratings, we can't completely blame it on the writing of Voyager. Breaking it down, The Next Generation would ironically be the highest rated Trek series, followed by the original series, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then Enterprise. From the research I could gather, the dip began during the time that the writers of DS9 decided to differentiate themselves from TNG. Because they wanted to be different, they took a stand of not your grandpa's Star Trek. They would have characters that broke the Prime Directive and still portrayed it as being okay and the officers as the good guys. Starfleet would be more militaristic, and if the writers had to bend continuity a bit, they would. They also wouldn't necessarily respect original works. This is most blatant in how the mirror universe was treated. In Voyager, this mentality carried over, but there was also the pressure of having lower ratings both from DS9 and from Voyager. They were also on a network that was outright dishonest with the advertising. Just trust me, Voyager advertising makes Discovery look like it actually cares and was being true to the original series representation, at least in some instances. So before I get into it, let me say this. Both the person with Discovery and Lisa Klink appear in all ways to care a lot about Star Trek, telling stories of the universe and even its continuity. A lot of you will scoff at this, but I sincerely believe it to be the case. I hold these opinions not only due to the conversations I've just had, but other interactions that I've had with people who work within the industry. And I truly believe that any extreme continuity issues or outright disdain for what came before can be thrown directly at the feet of showrunners and some of the executives, especially in the case of Discovery. And it's unfortunate because people will forget that in show business, business is a part of it. The entire point, from the original series to Discovery, is to make money, however you have to. So if executives and showrunners have to bend continuity or don't care in some instances, I'm not surprised. Writers, while not being as focused on the bottom line, will state that they care more about the story over continuity. In fact, Lisa challenged me when I asked her about what she thought of my criticisms of Discovery. She asked me how I liked the show if we removed the words Star Trek. This was also basically echoed by the contact that works for Discovery. And to answer that question, both Discovery and Voyager would be mediocre space operas with interesting dynamics that they never realized, and ultimately, they were just held back by themselves. They could have achieved greatness and didn't. Voyager showed that it could rival Battlestar Galactica when it came to how it handled some topics, just with a Trek spin. But most of it was never fully realized. Discovery is The Expanse if you remove the grittiness and ability to bring plot lines together cohesively. Both aren't really that great, and if you add the Star Trek name to it, they just miss the mark. they do no favors to the franchise. All that to say, I think that the writers of the various Star Trek series probably fell into a similar specific mentality. All of them that I've spoke to generally tell me the same thing, that they wanted to honor Star Trek but weren't above writing inconsistent things. They wanted to write good stories first, and in their opinion, a good story is better than continuity. And looking at it from a cynical point of view, that would hopefully lead to better ratings and more money for everyone. This last piece being my words, not theirs. This is, in my opinion, why Discovery is the way it is, because those who create Trek now can't do the storytelling of old. I sincerely believe that no one would watch TNG right now if it was to air like it did back then. And storytelling itself has changed drastically. Hell, to be honest, I am not convinced there is any show that is comparable to TNG, DS9, or Voyager in the quote-unquote lighthearted mannerisms and the way that it worked today. A lot of people will say Orville is the new Star Trek, but that's a comedy. Trek fans would not be open to a comedy. Just look at how open people are to the newest animation that is going to be a Star Trek series. It's basically a comedy. So all that to say, I don't know that Star Trek in the way that we all remember it could work today. So how does all of this tie into the Borg? Because that's probably why you clicked on the video, and I've included this episode as a part of that series. Obviously, the Borg of Wolf 359 are nothing like that of the Borg in the Voyager series finale. And definitively, they are not the Borg in Discovery, if indeed that is the Borg. The Borg of Voyager are villains of the week, with a centralized power structure and a hierarchy that is defeated by one ship and one captain in a very, very contrived way. While it was executives in the First Contact movie that insisted on a queen, the fleshing out of the concept was done in Voyager because the writers thought that the storytelling of the past couldn't work, that to get people to watch, they had to change it up. Whether you think that's a good idea or not is up to you individually, but take into account the last episode of Voyager matches the lowest ever episode of Star Trek Enterprise. So ultimately, in Voyager's case, do I blame the writers for the destruction of the Borg's continuity? Absolutely. According to Lisa, there was guidance, but they were never overruled by the executives, and the writers had more freedom than what we see in Discovery. Is that bad? Maybe. For me, someone who lives, eats, and breathes Star Trek, I think that it took a great story and enemy and watered them down. But I have to consider that I'm not the average viewer, and I want to challenge you, if you're watching this, are you really the average viewer as well? It's possible that the average popcorn-eating person would have loved this. And as far as Discovery, do I blame the writers for what has occurred? Not really. According to my source, what I've read independently and a general consensus, the showrunners and the executives are far more authoritarian on Star Trek writers than they have been historically. It's really too bad the networks don't trust the writers like they used to. So all of this writing to say it is clear that there was a destruction of what the Borg were, their very essence, and it would be because of money. But honestly, we can only blame the writers to the extent that we are willing to blame ourselves. How many of us would stick to continuity if it meant our families couldn't eat when the show got canceled? And the same is even worse for Discovery. So I can't really be sure. I may ask Lisa to come on and maybe have a hangout where her and I can talk, but people try to use the critique that if Discovery didn't exist, there would be no Trek. And if this is what it takes, this is the story writing to have what we remember Trek be Trek, and I don't know, my counter is if Trek has to be this, then maybe there shouldn't be. Trek has a wonderful legacy. There are some problems and there are some greatness, but overall, it's really good. And if it had to end with Star Trek Enterprise, I don't think that would have been a bad thing. But what are your thoughts?